welcome back into the Dropkick basement for another episode. Riveting conversation about the world and the history of pro wrestling. My name is Mike Madden. I am here. It's post AEW Double or Nothing. So a fun-filled weekend. Plus, I think WWE had that Saudi show. So there's a lot of wrestling buzz in the air. So I am welcome to the show, my co-host Tommy Schultz. Tom, I'm talking over you. So
hey, listen, you do your thing.
Yeah,
coming off a big weekend, a lot of stuff to be excited about.
Exactly. Yeah, we are without the Certified Five, Matt Geiger. He is on assignment this week. So Tommy and I are tackling the topic at hand, which we're going to be talking about creative minds in pro wrestling, and the history of pro wrestling with creative minds and bookers, and just in general, like people that are considered to be, trendsetters when it comes to writing the material that we watch every week. I wanted to actually start off with kind of a more modern guy when we're talking about creative minds. And we just watched Tom and I were together watching the AEW pay-per-view on Sunday night, which I thought was always their in-ring does a great job of getting you hyped and kind of showcasing what they do best, which is AEW We Wrestle. But what do you think? And he's gotten a lot of heat for this recently. Tony Khan. Thoughts on Tony Khan as a booker?
It's a tough thing to really nail down, because the wrestling nerd in me loves most of the product that we see.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because I love the in-ring action. But where he does lack is creating long-term stories to be told that are captivating outside of the ring.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's fair.
And I do think that it's something of a more recent time, because I do think that they were there when the company first started. I do think that, aside from the great in-ring product that you had stories that were being told between factions, characters. And I think with the more bloated the roster gets,
mm-hmm.
the more TV time, on-screen time, pay-per-view time you're trying to find for these people to have, and to come up with enough material for all of it, other than, well, this is a dream match, or
yeah,
these two guys are great in-ring performers.
Mm-hmm.
There tends to be the focus on about like maybe one angle that has actual meat on the bone, one or two at a time.
Okay.
And then things kind of digress into just, well, this is great. This is going to be a great match. So these two guys are going to
wrestle. I think they know what their fans like, and they kind of aim right in that sweet spot. And they know they're going to get they're going to get the loyals to follow along and trust that, hey, even if we haven't done, 6 weeks of TV to build up to half of our pay-per-view, we're just announcing 4 matches the week of. People are still going to go, oh, okay, well, that's great. I know they can pull off great matches. I know they can put together exciting finishes. The thing with Tony, though, and just because AEW was fresh in my mind, I think there's a big distinct difference. And you said something about long-term storytelling. I think that's there. I just don't think that's there as consistently as it can be.
Yeah,
because
pretty much, yeah.
They work such an intense style in AEW. Everybody goes hard. We just saw that Adam Copeland's going to be out with a broken tibia, I believe, for an inordinate amount of time. MJF was nursing injuries and then had to heal up from those injuries. Adam Cole, you got guys like Keith Lee who had momentum that ended up getting hurt. And so when it comes to long-term storytelling, I think they're kind of snake bitten with the roster performing as hard as they do. And also, when Tony gets an idea of the guys that he wants to feature on television, he wants to have them on their programming all the time. So some of these guys are going to get prone, especially the older ones, are going to get prone to like dealing with nagging injuries or having something really go wrong in the ring that you've got to take a little bit more time, off of television or off the road. So in that regard, I think he could be a lot more economical with backstage segments. They do great backstage segments that are on their YouTube channel or Instagram or X or whatever it is. They're dotting, some of those I's outside of their major programming. And I think they would, there's media savvy people and there's obviously a younger demographic that's going to chase that stuff down. But unfortunately, a lot of pro wrestling fans are like, well, he doesn't show us the work on the TV show.
That is a complaint that I have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you only have, as a human being, so many hours in a day to dedicate to watching wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I'm already giving you every Wednesday 2 hours. Half the year, I'll give you Saturday night. If I'm not doing anything, I'll give you another 2 hours.
Okay. Right.
Can't give you Friday night.
No. The hour Friday night.
You're asking for too much.
Yeah.
And then if you're gonna make me chase down more stuff on YouTube or on your social media platforms, it becomes, that stuff gets lost.
Yeah, or it has to be shared. That's the other thing is I don't think there's a lot. I think a lot of wrestling fans would follow along with their shit on social. It's just not everybody has it, or not everybody is tethered to it. Where it's I'm scrolling through this all day to see the AEW clip of Jack Perry's post match promo. It looks great, but somebody had to send that to me. So you're gonna have a disconnect there because there's. I guess there's a traditional, I want to see this on television. I don't want to see this, elsewhere.
Yeah. And I do think that a lot of the complaints about what I'm trying to say have come through within the last year to year and a half of the 5-year existence of the company. And I do think that there's a distinct line in the sand where they debuted Collision, and Collision felt like a very different show than Dynamite.
Oh, sure,
the way it was shot, the way it was presented.
Yeah.
They had different announcers. They had essentially almost a different roster. Completely. Almost. I mean, you almost kind of had a Collision roster.
Some of that was by force.
Some of that's exactly. But when it just kind of felt like when Collision when it was kind of when Punk left, and it was, I guess, the need to separate the two kind of became less of a personal issue and more of a we have enough TV time for it. Just it kind of diluted the difference.
Of course,
the specialness of it, or whatever was making it feel different. And now everything, it was giving guys that weren't getting time on TV, but now all the guys that are on Dynamite are just on Collision too.
Yeah,
and it kind of, that's where it's not that there's no storytelling; it's you're telling the same stories.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's not enough of them. You have one of the most talented rosters in the history of the business.
Yeah.
Why not? And you see guys like what happened last night. A guy like Ethan Page, very capable performer.
Yeah.
Awesome in the ring, even better on the microphone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they pretty much did nothing with him. And boom, makes a huge splash on NXT
Yeah,
last night.
and he's freshened up over there. He looks to be probably going to be excited to be there because you can't lose sight of a lot of these guys. It's still their lifelong goal, even though like ECW seems or AEW, I should say, is a good home for a lot of guys, and they have a lot of loyalty to it. If they're not getting used, and they happen to have to ply their trade elsewhere, and WWE says, well, we're going to feature you on our NXT show, and you're going to be a big impact at the beginning of it, or the beginning of your tenure over there. Shit, you're going to take that. You're going to be smart, and you're going to take that spot.
Yeah,
and it's going to work out great for him. And that's the type of thing where Paige was brought in pandemic time.
Yeah,
and I think that
a little bit before maybe.
So it's funny. It's like I think that was kind of the tipping point of the way the roster went. Is I think they fattened up the roster because they were unsure about who was going to be around week to week, and it was like, well, we want to do what's great for the wrestling business, and we want to sign a bunch of people because the other company is ditching a bunch of people.
Yep, that's true.
So you had a lot of bodies, and that set of bodies, the good ones, they were like, we're giving you like 3-year deals. And those 3-year deals are coming to an end now. So you're going to see a lot of people, end up unfortunately getting shown the door or saying like, I'm going to find work elsewhere because you don't have enough working hours on TV. You don't have a developmental brand. You technically don't have a second brand. So you're fighting for airtime. And I think like when push comes to shove, like he avoided using creative writers for up until probably this year when they're going to bring a few on, and they already have started to bring a few on. He's still booking the finishes. I think he still gets a good amount of input from at least the EVP side of things, and probably some good minds like Chris Daniels and Jerry Lynn and Malenko when it comes to like putting together finishes and stuff. But I think Tony right now is sophomore slumping. 5 years in, he's sophomore slumping, and it's time for him to maybe look elsewhere to find a co-head of creative or somebody that can there was a showrunner somewhere else that can say, all right, well, I'll take half of this from you. So I'll do Collision. Even if we have to share some people on the roster, I'm going to take Collision, and we're going to go back to where it was a year and a half ago, where it felt like a different show, and we're going to see where we go from there. Good luck to him.
I mean, in reality, he had a good run by himself.
Yeah. Oh.
And successful companies there's never been a successful company that's only ever had one booker for its
entire run. Yeah.
So he's you can only come up with so much shit.
Yeah. Well, and that leads us into kind of the next phase of what we're going to talk about when it comes to creative minds. I think the last guy that was 100% the creative force behind a brand, at the time the third brand in the United States during the Monday Night Wars and the wrestling boom of the mid to late 90s, Paul Heyman.
Oh yeah.
I think he shares a lot of similarities to Tony when it comes to, this is my company. I might have some outside investors that I'm taking money from, willingly or unwillingly. But a lot of the burden of responsibility. Now, he did consult with some of the guys on the roster to help create the characters or to enhance their characters a little bit differently. So famously, like, he sat down with Raven before Raven came in, said, this is what I think we can do with this character. And Raven was like, no, this is what I envision it to be. And he kind of let him have free reign over his promo styles and, what he finishes that he wanted to do. So he's utilizing creative people that had good minds that he was friendly with when he was bringing them in. Shane Douglas is another one where it was like, you know, what's Shane Douglas is going to be the top heel in the company. Is he just going to be a carbon copy of Flair? No, Douglas threw in like, you know, a few more of his nuances to it to enhance. But for the most part, like, you know, take away a handful of guys that had a little bit of an idea as to what their character should be. Paulie was creating characters. He was writing TV. He was making it chaotic. He's editing that whole thing.
Yeah.
So I think he's like a spiritual, and I think somebody like Tony Khan probably wants to be Paulie a lot, you know?
And the benefits that Heyman had that Tony did not is he spent 20 years in the business before he got to ECW, learning from some of the smartest creative minds that there ever were.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he had a plethora of knowledge, a plethora of experience. I want my stuff to look like this, not like this. I want to use these guys, not those guys. He made it the true alternative to, as opposed to the competition to.
Yes.
ECW, the way that the things that he wanted to do with that company, he never wanted to be. He knew that you know, you're never going to compete with WCW and WWF, but you can draw some of their fans to make it as big as you can make it.
And here's the funny thing, because I remember watching ECW when it first got on TV in New York, right? So you're watching this thing. It comes on 1 o'clock in the morning on the MSG network, right? It's in what is normally like the infomercial time zones, right? So, you know, all of your Yankee games, your Knick games, your Ranger games, all of them are done, you know, relatively by, let's say, 12 o'clock, and their post games are done. And then it's like normally like on, you know, 6 other days of the week, you've got like, here's an infomercial for some, you know, gym equipment for your home or, you know, some get rich quick scheme. But it happened to be this, it was a random Friday night. They were sitting at a house party, flipping around. Saw it on television. It looked like nothing else. It was like, this is wrestling. And it's flying in the face of cartoon wrestling that was happening on both programs. So you're right. It was a true alternative, but it was also like, and there was a lot of the things that get misconstrued about ECW started to get misconstrued in the early days because a lot of their advertising, where they would talk about shows that were in the area or, you know, ways to, you know, have ECW promote shows. Like, this is for hardcore wrestling fans, right? So it wasn't like hardcore wrestling because there was no term hardcore wrestling. It was, this will appeal to hardcore wrestling fans. And it's appealing to hardcore wrestling fans because it was physical. It was angles that were, again, you don't want to talk about long-term stories. Paulie is one of the long-term story.
Oh, yeah.
He's on the Mount Rushmore of long-term bookers. But it was that sort of like, even though it's an episodic TV show and he's got, you know, an expanding audience that's going to be tuning in, he's still reminding you, this is what happened with, you know, this rivalry 6 months ago, which is leading us to this, you know, title opportunity that they finally got, and so on and so forth. So there's always that. So that was the, you know, when you say you're appealing to a hardcore wrestling fan, that's what separated ECW from WCW and WWF, because they wanted mainstream. They wanted the casual fan. They wanted to build their audience on new fans. ECW wanted people to come back to wrestling that had abandoned it 5 years ago. So that's where the blood came in. That's where the physical style, but also the technical wrestling style that they figured like, well, it's 1995. There's a bunch of tape traders that are, you know, trying to get these tapes from hotlines or from catalogs or whatever it is, that are ordering from Japan, that are getting these dubs and all this other stuff. So why aren't we appealing to that more by bringing in those guys, bringing in, popular overseas talent? So that is all what made Paulie a genius, an evil genius, as they love to call him. But he's a genius in the sense of he made our show for old school professional wrestling fans, hardcore wrestling fans. Then it became, the term was hardcore wrestling. It totally got bastardized and it got sent down the river. And I think Paul would be the first person to tell you that it wasn't his intention to become a blood and guts company. That was just what actually drew a new entire segment of the audience from. So I think that's where Tony Khan probably has a little bit of a kindred spirit to Paul, because I think he knows that his show is for traditional wrestling fans.
Oh, 100%.
And it's not for expanding an audience or getting a deal to do shows in Scotland and Paris and Saudi Arabia. Those are all great. Those are all nice. They drive a ton of revenue and they make yourself a global brand. But at the end of the day, a lot of those fans are going to leave wrestling in 3 years or in 5 years, even in 10 years. They're going to leave. Appealing to a hardcore wrestling fan and using your booking brain to appeal to a hardcore wrestling fan is what a lot of people that we're going to be talking about in this episode did better than anybody else, and had huge success and helped create a territory system and a buzz around pro wrestling in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever it was. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that because he's gone on to have so much more success as an on-screen talent, that especially on today's fans, his contributions with ECW get lost a bit. To the new audience of because they know him as the advocate or the wise man or whatever character it is that he's portraying now, and he's so good at it.
He's
just as good as that as he was.
Nobody's ever taken that away from him, that he, even before he had ECW, he's one of the best managers that was in the business, way prior to that. So so what else do you any other names that kind of pop out in your research of wrestling minds and bookers?
We kind of touched on this pre-show, but coming from the Heyman tree is Gabe Sapolsky.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, what he did, he almost single-handedly created an independent wrestling boom in the early 2000s that is only being matched nowadays.
Yep.
When Ring of Honor was taken over by Gabe, I mean, that's some of the best wrestling that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And especially on an independent level to reach, the levels that company did, make the stars that it did, is all coming from Gabe, who, learned his craft from Paulie.
That's very true. And I think that's so Gabe kind of, I mean, he was part of it from the beginning, but he was solely
he took it after the Feinstein thing happened, right?
2004.
I want to say it was like 2003
or 04.
2003. Yeah, early 2004.
And they were doing well. I mean, it wasn't like they were, the shits then. Like they had
no.
They were building that roster, and they were building it. And again, it's another thing where you kind of lose to time, like the way that wrestling was consumed by hardcore fans, traditional old school wrestling fans, whatever you want to call them, because you had to go to, and I think this is what Gabe did an incredible job of was making sure that especially in the early goings, every card was a big event, right?
Yep.
So if you followed along, so they're not on television,
Nope.
you're buying their DVDs or you're going to the shows locally, or you're reading about them on the internet or in dirt sheets or whatever it is. And all of this, like he did pro wrestling fans a great service in that it threw it back to a time where you could almost like compare it to UWF in the 80s or even like, a little bit of early ECW before they were really on television, where it was like, you've got to drive to the local show in your part of the country. Hopefully it comes to your part of the country. And you got to check this out live because you're definitely going to see a unique matchup in there, but you're also going to see like the up and comers of the business be able to showcase what they can do and again, another thing that like he is, I think people lose sight of the match formats and that code of honor
Yeah.
was so different and so unique for anything that they did in pro wrestling up to that point. Maybe you could go back to the 40s or 50s where you had to have a handshake before the match, or, there was some sort of like, adherence to rules that were, that would benefit the day-to-day or the week-to-week shows, but also at any point you needed to break those rules, that made it so much more impactful and much more significant than just saying like, well, here's this one got out of hand and we're disqualifying everybody and all the other stuff. So I think he certainly ranks pretty high on guys in the last 20 years that is a unique booker. Probably a hard guy to work for, from what I gather, from what some of the boys say, because he was a set in his ways kind of guy. He wasn't, and he was Paulie's apprentice in the ECW days, almost his assistant. And I think when they started Ring of Honor, him and the other two guys from RF Video, I think the idea was to start off with, everything is going to feature the future stars of pro wrestling with maybe a little bit of input from, older guys, but we're not going to we don't need stars. We're going to make stars. And you can see that still happening. And I think it happens a lot in modern booking and modern independent wrestling. But at that time, everything was about like everything away from Ring of Honor. And even like, when he started, what was it, Dragon Gate USA and Evolve and all the other offshoots that he branched off of when he left Ring of Honor, everything was about like, we're not going to tear it down and build it back up with huge names. We're going to find the next guy. We want to make the next guy on the indies. It's a shame. Like, he works for WWE, right? Like he's back with them.
I know
think
he did. I don't know if he still is, but I know he was for a while. I don't know.
He would be
because he had a big part in NXT for a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case anymore. But he might be in the Performance Center or something.
Could be, yeah. Or he could be, if he's helping to write something as a, sixth from the top guy, he would be he's the type of guy that if he was a free agent, just Gabe Sapolsky should get that call from Tony Khan and say like, here's Ring of Honor back. And here, look at all these young contracts.
They did. So at that time in indie wrestling, there wasn't it almost became a territory system again, where, even early days of Ring of Honor, it's strictly in the Northeast.
Yeah.
You're doing Philly, you're doing New York, you're doing Jersey, Boston. But he turned it into a touring brand that went from running once a month, which a lot of independent like CZW,
Yeah.
Pro Wrestling Unplugged, like these territorial indie promotions would run
Hmm.
one big show once a month. He started running Friday, Saturday, bi-weekly.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
now you have two shows, you have four shows a month, and they're touring around the country.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where he picked up a lot of, you know, you bring in the local guy from that to do like the opener match, and also their school had a lot to do
I was
with
gonna say, like, at the same time,
that as well.
you're getting a lot of good graduates from their school, and you have trainers that are working for their company in their almost their developmental phase as well. So a lot of the
Yeah.
guys learned, whether it was on the fly or not, like, if you could call them veterans, like the Danielsons and the Punks and Jimmy Jacobs and all those guys that were in and out as, like, associate trainers or assistant trainers, whatever it was. They were all sort of like learning how to coach and how to eventually themselves become wrestling geniuses and smart people to have in a locker room and to be around young talent. So a lot of respect to Gabe and his run there at Ring of Honor. And even I still go back every once in a while and I'll see something from, like, the Evolved, first
Oh yeah.
first 2 years. It's like, Jesus, like, some of his point systems were complicated, but
Yeah.
but the guy could put on spectacle shows.
He wanted to bring a realism or like a sports aspect
Yes.
to
Yeah.
to wrestling that at the time was completely lost.
Foreign, right? Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And so this is so I'm going to kind of reach back a little bit further in wrestling history. And I think I could compare, like, you talk about Zapolsky being from the Paul Heyman school of bookers and that sort of mentality and mind frame. Eddie Graham ran the Florida territory in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s. He would have at least one and sometimes two people underneath him that were apprentices. In the 70s, it was Cowboy Bill Watts, who ended up creating Mid-South Wrestling and morphed that into a national promotion in the UWF in 85 and 80. I think it was 86 when UWF went national and crowned heavyweight champions. So Bill Watts was certainly influenced by Eddie Graham. Dusty Rhodes, for crying out loud. Dusty Rhodes was like one of Eddie's real disciples when it comes to that. Like, taught him how to do finishes, even though, like, man, Dusty wanted to protect Dusty a lot of times and kind of kill towns with some of his booking. But when it comes to, like, creating the star of the territory and creating the centerpiece of it, whether it's Dusty or whether it was Magnum or whether it was Barry Windham or whoever it was, like, Dusty, for a while there, he had a great run of building that, like, strong baby face to go up against that strong heel that's going to be your main event program that's selling out. And then whoever was the NWA champ that was coming through that was ready to take on all challengers. They wrote really great weekly television on that. Kevin Sullivan took over Florida and again was Dusty's main rival for a few years there, the devil himself. But also, like, eventually he goes to WCW. And I think this is where, like, if there's one thing, like, Eddie Graham was great at he would have the foreign menace heel. So he would have somebody like Pak Song, or he would have Boris Malenko or whoever it was. And they were always like the terror of Florida. Eventually, Kevin Sullivan was himself the terror of Florida. I think Kevin, God bless him, took way too much of Eddie Graham's ideas about we need to have something that's really ominous and villainous in the middle of our main event program, and just beat it to death when he got to WCW.
Yes.
So Kevin Sullivan, genius that he is the kind of the guy who begat the Dungeon of Doom. The the Faces of Fear, and originally that was the Three Faces of Fear, which was him, the Shark, and the Butcher, Brutus Beefcake, and then it became the Dungeon of Doom because he was like, let's get more people in here. So as we were kind of talking about with the learning trees, sometimes it bears great fruit. I always think that Bill Watts is a good example of like one of the smartest like weekly television guys. Like he made weekly television in UWF that influenced Paulie to do what Paulie was doing in ECW eventually. And there's a lot of other people that kind of stole and pulled some stuff. And Dusty was always good at, let's create a lot of momentum around a pack of baby faces to go up against our heel champs and see who could be the first one to knock them off. And if you can't, you're going to have a screwy finish, and then hopefully that doesn't kill your town and you can come back. But Sullivan's the one guy who I think he had the longest like booking tenure of any of these guys.
For sure.
Because he went into the 2000s with WCW. But he just not really, probably a better by committee brain than a standalone brain when you really think about it.
I mean, but at the same time, you have to say that, I mean, with him in that, I don't know if he was the sole booker, but they enjoyed their greatest success as well.
He was part of right. Yeah, he was part of and I think, a lot of it, when it comes to the NWO angle and the cruiserweights and the talent that was being brought into WCW in the Nitro era, Bischoff takes some credit. Kevin Sullivan takes credit in like this is how we formatted it for the TV, and this is how we introduced the new stars in the first hour and then teased the NWO was going to be part of the second hour. So I think when it comes to like formatting a TV show and sort of getting all of your talent, like you're talking about like both companies in the 90s, the late 90s especially, learned how to utilize a big, huge roster of guys that they had to showcase almost everybody either every week or every other week. So I think the balance of that, like you got to give them credit for that.
Yeah.
But there's something still lacking in the direct character development that Kevin Sullivan was part of. Because it always ended up being like, and he was a big like, the heel's going to get heat. The heel is going to get heat. And Hogan's the savior. Okay, yeah. And that kind of like, not to say it would have sunk them, but if Hogan didn't decide to become the third man, it probably would have been ugly in '96 for them. I'll be honest. But your kind of Eddie Graham tree is covered there. There's a couple more folks. I think you said you had a couple more like more modern brains, or from the indie scene that might have sparked your interest.
So if we're going, so this is the thing. It's like I kind of went either we're going with the best or we're going with the worst.
Okay, all right.
And for me, especially when you're talking about nowadays, the worst independent booker I think of all time is DJ Hyde.
Okay.
Who ran CZW, took it. He bought essentially. For those who don't know, CZW was a local Philadelphia, South Jersey promotion started by John Zandig.
Yeah.
In 1999, and essentially it was like they wanted to be the new ECW once ECW closed. but they took it to another level with death matches and
Yeah.
light tubes and all that stuff. So but they also at the same time would have uh, guys like Trent Acid and like they would have Homicide come in, and a lot of these like staple Chris Hero, they would come in and they just put on like great shows.
What was they had the tournament every year. What was it? Survival of the
The
fittest.
the the best of the best.
Best of the best. Yeah.
Yeah, which was like at the time was probably the premier junior heavyweight tournament
In the United
country.
States. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But when Zandig's in-ring career started to wrap up, I think he started to lose interest in strictly just booking and owning the company. And DJ Hyde was a trainee of theirs. Not great in the ring.
No name. Yeah. No name in the ring. Like,
who was able to secure the funds to buy the company from Zandig and essentially run it as
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they did have, so there's a lot of guys that came out of that the DJ Hyde crop of CZW, but almost every single one of them went to enjoy their most success elsewhere.
Yeah.
You have the guys like Adam Cole, Swerve, Ricky Shane Page,
Yeah. Rich Swann,
Leo
I think,
Rush, Rich
brought
Swann,
up with them. Mm-hmm.
all of Sammy Callahan, John Moxley.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of these guys kind of got their first break in CZW, and he would just book them into such shit that they were like, all right, I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to go elsewhere. And I mean, the company's still around today. I literally couldn't name a single person that
I was just going to say, like, you never hear about, like, there's never buzz about a show, even on like a Mania weekend. You were in Philly for Mania weekend. Did you see
They didn't run.
They didn't run in Philadelphia.
Insane.
That's their.
That was their, like, they took essentially once ECW closed, Combat Zone took over the arena. That was their place.
Yeah. They were forcing other indies that could have worked there and could have had a healthy relationship with, based on the fan base that was in Philadelphia. They sort of like, they froze a lot of those other indies out by being the strong ones, but also like kind of they had a little bit of a working relationship with Ring of Honor.
Very loose,
but
they would kind of have a working relationship with a lot of promotions until
DJ Hyde took over, and it just became his kingdom. Yeah. Which is a shame, because
even when Zandig was running it, like, someone would do something that he didn't like, and then they would just be like, well, fuck them, and he would come out on the show and publicly bury everybody.
Them.
Like they did with, I mean, they had that great program that they did with Ring of Honor. That then he was just like, fuck Jim Cornette, and
it just became right. It became a fight amongst people that think they're more important. Like, so when you're this is the deadly downfall of the booker or the guy that runs a promotion. When you think you're more important than the rest of the roster, and it does a disservice to your fan base, then you are not important at all. All of these guys, that are bad bookers or bad businessmen. We'll start kind of circle DJ here for a second. I'm sure DJ saw what went on during the Monday Night Wars when the owner of the company was on television every week, and he's you're fired and all this other stuff. And Eric Bischoff is the center of the NWO, and Paul Heyman is on television saying fuck the Nashville network, and ECW is still the rebels of the pro wrestling business. All these people didn't realize that, like, they had already built their businesses up to that point that they could play fast and loose with it. When whether it's Zandig, whether it's DJ Hyde or anybody, I mean, this has happened during the history of the business. But when
Yeah.
you're making yourself more important than the promotion and the talent and the working relationship that you may have with a more established partner, that's a recipe for disaster. That's going to turn the fans off. There are some fans that came to see this rivalry and watch it extend, and either you couldn't get along with Jim Cornette, or whatever it was, or you couldn't get along with Gabe or Adam Pearce or whoever was running Ring of Honor, down the road, or you're going to fight with Super Dragon because you don't want to share guys from PWG
Yeah.
with, two ways, or your guys with PWG for their, bowler or whatever it is. That does a disservice to the wrestling fans who are like, the indies should be the melting pot. The indies should be where I have a chance to see guys that I've never seen before. I don't pay money to see the booker walk out and bury another booker
And put himself over.
and say like, "Oh, we're here to establish," and all this other stuff. It's you're being an idiot at that point. You're just basically like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And they used to do that they would do that in Memphis all the time. Jerry Lawler would go on TV and he'd shit on like WWF, or he'd say something bad about the AWA, or whatever. Like, and they weren't even real rivals. Memphis was small potatoes. Great TV show in Memphis, but when you're the top star and you're booking yourself as the world heavyweight champion, and you have the AWA championship, and you're currently fighting with, whether you're fighting for money with these other promotions or not, you're still making it about what the perception is over here on the left from another company. Focus on your shit.
Yeah.
Write more compelling stories for your shit. If you've got something that's going to cross over and you're going to collaborate with somebody else, that's a totally different story. Then you get together with the higher ups in that company and you say, how do we protect your guys? How do we protect my guys? What's going to give us the best outcome? Who wins in the end of this? Or what's our outcome going to be, and how fast do we need to get this thing started, or how long do you think we can stretch this out? Competition and intermingling and fighting is great when it comes to these creative people, but if you're not strong enough in your in putting on good shows week after week, and this is the other thing, I think the financial issues that CZW had, that's the reason why they don't run a lot of shows anymore. And that's the reason why they don't have any high profile, attachment to anything, because if you don't have enough money to get your name and your brand out there, people are going to start to walk away from it because, well, it's not as flashy. CZW on the East Coast indies, or even on the United States indies, doesn't hold a candle to what GCW is doing.
No.
So my attention is going to GCW. Yeah, of course, my attention is probably going to be to like one of the major companies, but my dollars are going to go to somebody that I know is going to bring in good talent. They're not going to fight with that talent, or if they are, it'll be behind the scenes, and they're not going to do it to torpedo their own show.
Yeah, that was that one for me. Just like I remember, I would go to every show as like a teenager, early 20s.
Oh, you love deathmatch. You're a deathmatch guy.
Oh yeah, and I just had to stop. I just had to call it quits because I was like, I can't drive to Philadelphia and spend $100.
Yeah, seeing
on this bullshit.
Seeing kind of a bullshit show and kind of a bad, a bad faith deal, more or less, is what it ended up being after a while. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Vince Russo because Vince Russo,
I think it's been said
to death.
Hey, could have been on
last episode. Right? He was a TV writer, no more, no less. There's a lot of guys like Bruce Pritchard had some good ideas. Pat Patterson is
yes.
Let's let it be said that Pat Patterson is probably one of the most creative Finnish guys. Like he's on par with Eddie Graham and Paulie, in my opinion, as far as like creative and figuring out a way to make something out of nothing. And remember that Pat was also, he was like the so he's, Vince's right hand man when it comes to ideas and like, well, how do we do this finish? But he was also like kind of key in like their house show business.
Yeah.
So, when Pat is working with, the road agents to say like, all right, what are we going to do here in, when we had to do a show in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or San Francisco, like places where Pat had been before. And he's like, well, this works for this type of crowd. And we need to, in order to set up Hogan's next title defense here, we need to do this type of a finish, and would, kind of lay that out and take some of those ideas from other places. But then he's really the godfather of the pay-per-view era of pro wrestling.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to like guys that were very pivotal in fine-tuning how, one night of wrestling on pay-per-view could begin and want you to come back, the next month to see what they had to offer, after that. So he deserves a ton of credit for that. Vince was a character guy and kind of helped make the television compelling and interesting. I think Pat was more of the pro wrestling booker in that relationship. Sure. I mean, Cornette had his moments. I think there's
I was going to say the same thing.
If you go back and you look at Smoky Mountain, like Smoky Mountain was really good for maybe about a 2-year period. Then he started to see his talent go away and get signed and move on. But there, you can certainly, and he was the parallel to Paulie more or less, except he doesn't have as many disciples. Oh, sorry, Jimmy. He might have a podcast that people listen to now that are like, mouth breather wrestling fans, but there's no disciples of Jim Cornette that went on to like, work in major promotions or, or run super indies or anything like that.
And I think kind of his time in Ring of Honor almost kind of did this same as Smoky Mountain, where he had great ideas, but as guys started getting signed, that started the decline.
Yeah, he was in that eternal struggle to maintain some version of a roster, and I think like when they got their first television deal.
Oh
was
yeah,
that like HDNet?
Yep, that's the one.
He had a great roster. He utilized a lot of those guys well, but he fucked over people that probably could have been and ended up being major players and major stars that had, a big interest in seeing what Ring of Honor could do for them because of the lineage that it had over the previous 5 years. So again, mistakes were made. He gets frustrated and fed up, fights backstage with his own team and everybody about, little chicken shit bullshit that happens. And then sayonara, there's Jim going out the door.
There's the door.
Same thing for, he started OVW as a developmental brand, ran a decent program up until a point where he just became too obnoxious behind the scenes, and somebody was like, Jim's got to go. Jim could write some decent television, but Jim's more of a problem, HR-wise than he is creative-wise.
Because he's got such a wealth of knowledge and does have good ideas, but it's like just he's such a polarizing person that
he's an old curmudgeon is what he is.
Yeah, you can't maintain that.
No.
And I think like if you want to talk about old curmudgeon, another guy that you could talk about is Ole. Like in like the early 90s of WCW.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Just a guy that like I would say essentially the same thing happened where the talent couldn't stand him because it was his way or the highway.
He also like that was a guy who had a good run when he first started booking Georgia Championship Wrestling. Had a good run of playing to that Georgia crowd. He was still booking Georgia wrestling when he came back to WCW in 1990 and 91, and and it was like, well, nobody's interested in Tommy Rich. It's your undercard is the junkyard fucking dog who's knocking on on 40, and he's 350 pounds. Like,
Yeah.
he's not the guy. Paul Orndorff, God bless him, was not the guy for WCW at that time. And he was so reluctant and so like, just like, he didn't do Flair any great shakes either. He was the one who was looking to get Flair out of the main event scene, maybe create new stars, but like the rest of the card wasn't prepared for Flair to slip back. No. And as much as he was, in favor of saying, well, let's get some fresh ideas in here and let's book this and let's book that, he's another one that just like fed into the whole, like, we have to create characters out of people that aren't characters. So I'm going to listen to what actually Jim Herd is telling me. And like, I'm going to, try to make this, a little bit more show business, and a lot of sinkers, not a lot of floaters, a lot of sinkers for Ole. And he was an old bastard. He was an old mean bastard that was just cheap with his time and impatient with his roster. So too bad. But I think we covered a lot. I think we had without getting really in the weeds and going deep on guys, I could probably spend 40 minutes talking about the genius of Eddie Gilbert or Gary Hart, but we're getting a little bit too in the regional side of things. So I think we had this covered, and I appreciate the input and you kind of giving me the 411 on some of the more modern guys that are out there and doing good things.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I always appreciate a history lesson. So sometime we can go back and we could talk about the territory bookers, and I would love that. But, I do think that we did touch on of the last, 30 to 40 years, a lot of good and bad that we've seen.
For sure. Yeah, and we didn't make it all about burying two guys. And letting that be the case. So that wraps up the show for this week. Thank you, Tom, for jumping on. We'll be back with you guys soon for another episode. So for Tommy Schultz, this is Mike Madden. Hope you guys have a great night. See you in the ring.